Hello and welcome back to Overbooked. I'm Amanda and today I wanted to do a book review, book talk about the book, The New Wilderness by Diane Cook. So I just finished this book because I was reading it for the Stacks book club pick for February. It is now March, so obviously I'm a little behind, but I still finished it and I actually really enjoyed it for the most part, but I have just a lot of thoughts that I wanted to talk about. So let's talk about them. First of all, the overall synopsis or what's going on in this book is this book shows us a future where climate change truly has its toll on society. There's these two distinct parts where it's the city where everyone lives and the air pollution and just overall just pollution levels is really bad. You can't really be outside for very long. They all live in very stacked apartments and all their windows are closed. It's not, you can't just open your window because it would be terrible for your health. And kids get really sick because they can't handle the pollution and a lot of them die. And it's just a terrible place to be, essentially. Fun. Then there's also this wilderness where people are not, there's no people there, and the overall government or system in this society is called the administration, and they have decided that they're going to conduct a study with about 20 individuals who are going to go out into this wilderness and see how they cope or how they are affected and how they live. The thing is, and there's a bunch of rules essentially that they have to follow, and this group of people are given a manual and they have to follow everything that's in the manual. And the main rules are they have to be nomads, so they have to be continually moving. They can't be in one place for more than 7 days, and they have to live off the land. They can't take anything. There's a group of people that are called the rangers that essentially oversee them, and they can't help them. There's really no assistance that's supposed to be given to them. They're really supposed to navigate this world by themselves. In this book, we have a group, we follow that study, essentially, this group of people. And we are introduced in the beginning of the book to our main character, one of our main characters, who is, I think you pronounce it B, because it's, Beatrice. And she is the wife of the person who came up with this idea. And they went there essentially to save her daughter, who is Agnes, who is another one of our main characters. Because in the city, she was a child. I think when they moved out of the city, they were 4. She was 4. Her daughter, Agnes, was really sick and couldn't breathe. The air was pretty much killing her. And so in this last ditch effort to save her daughter's life, they go into the wilderness to see if it will help. And it has. So we're introduced to this group as they're I think 3 years into this study, and B is taking us through everybody who's in this group, and they've lost members, so that's not 20 people anymore. Some people have died. I think some people just went back. And then there was children who had been born. And so it was just a whole different group. And so in this book, we watch this group of people as they navigate their life out there. And really their only purpose is just to survive and also go and follow instructions from that group of people that I referred to earlier, rangers, who are telling them hey, they go to posts where they can receive things mail and further instructions. And that's kind of all they're doing is shuffling from one post to another. That's kind of the whole picture, I guess. In our story, we really look mainly at B and Agnes, and those are our two main characters and whose perspectives that we see. And in the beginning, like I said, we see B's perspective, and I really enjoyed getting B's perspective, and we don't get her whole perspective throughout the book, which I'm actually really bummed about. But she is taking us through the beginning and how she gives us a rundown of everybody in the group. She's giving us all their characteristics, analyzing everybody. That's kind of what she's known for, is observing of what's going on and being able to interpret how she should react to these people's behavior in order to survive. And it's fascinating, and I loved her perspective. And we also see her daughter, Agnes, it's also just interesting for that part of the story because we get to see like their mother-daughter relationship out in the open, and just like a mother-daughter relationship is complicated everywhere you go, whether it's in a city or if you're in the wilderness. Literally, it's always like this complicated, weird relationship. Like that's just always how it is. And my favorite parts of this book is really getting like that group dynamic that happens when we're surrounded by the group and we're getting told like what the group is doing, how they're interacting with each other, because I just found that really fascinating. And I also just loved the whole like storyline around Bead, oh my god, whatever, however you say her name, and Agnes. I just thought that was also fascinating. And then, but also we get the perspective of Agnes, which is also just, that's where I like just started like getting really annoyed with the book, because it was like I did not like Agnes as a narrator. And the Stacks talks about this like in their episode where they talk about this book, how like Agnes is not a reliable narrator because she is like 11 years old. So she's also kind of like her mother, where she just likes to observe people, but she is not doing it in the way that her mother is. Like when we are with B, we know she's observing people and she's making mental notes because she knows that it's critical for her to understand the people she's around in order to survive and react to their actions. And like she knows that this is a game. Like she knows that she has to be on guard and know every single thing about everybody in this group. And Agnes does not obviously understand that because she's 11. She's a child. And so she's observing everybody, but it's also just like she doesn't really get it. Like she's just, it's infuriating. Like there's a man named Carl, and I freaking hate Carl. He's like the worst. Carl is the guy at work who mansplains to you all day, every day, but then like won't do anything about the problem and that he's trying to mansplain. And it's just so, he's the worst. I hate him. And B knows like that Carl is the worst, but she also knows that he's like critical to survival. Agnes does not understand, and she also just doesn't get what like her observations of Carl are just so from a child's perspective. Like she's like, I don't get why like Carl's like this, and it's just like, well, because you've only been exposed to like 4 dudes in your life in this group. Another infuriating thing about Agnes is like how she thinks that she's an adult. So they don't keep track of time. There's no calendars or whatever here. So she doesn't know exactly how old she is. And she's like, I could be 11, I could be 12, I could be 15, or I could be 40. And I'm like, whoa, that's a big jump from 11 to 40. And it just didn't make any sense. And I know, and again, I know she's a kid, but I was just like, really? Seems like you would know you're not 40 years old. But I guess the most fascinating thing is like, as we progress through the book, we see like B realizes that she has lost her daughter to this like wilderness environment. Like it's like they're 2 completely different people from when they first started, obviously, but it's like Agnes thinks that this is like her home now, and this is a place that the only thing that she needs to understand is the wilderness. And I don't think Agnes feels like she has to understand people as well. But as we go on through the book, it's like, yes, it is important to understand and realize that, like, and just, it is important to know the people around you and understand their motives and their, like, psychology. And I feel like we see that Agnes lacks that, but we also see that sometimes B lacks that as well. Like, sometimes she has the wrong judgment of people. And so that's sometimes just really interesting to see. And, like, it's almost like they're having their own, like, power dynamic struggle thing in this group. And it was fascinating. I thought this book was fascinating. I was captivated from like beginning to end, except it's like and I feel like the Stacks described it really perfectly, and I agreed. It's like throughout the book there is like so much description, there's so much detail, which I actually really enjoyed, and I felt like the author did a really great job. And then at the end it's like she just wanted to end the book really fast, so we just like rushed through the end of what was happening, and it was just kind of like I almost couldn't keep up like with what was going on. Like I felt like that's how fast the ending was moving, where I was just like, did we miss a turn back there? I don't what happened? I don't know where we are right now. Something that I also didn't really like, which they didn't really talk about in the Stacks, but Tracy talks about like on the Stacks Instagram post, which I also thought about the entire time that I was reading the book, is that I felt like this story was like appropriating Indigenous culture. Like the entire time I felt like it was like like the group of people are on this land, right, that is given to them, but they're forced to keep moving around this land, and they don't want to. They just want to settle down on the land that they think is theirs. Like there's this valley that they consider home that they were able to be at for like, I think a year or something, or a considerable amount of months that's like not allowed in their manual. Obviously the rangers come and like make them move, and it was just like very, I felt like similar to what Indigenous cultures in America had to go through, where like, you know, this was their home and we made them move, and then once they got more comfortable we moved them again, and then just kept moving them around and changing the rules as they went, and they just couldn't really argue anything even though the rules didn't make sense. Like it just felt like really like, okay. And it was like, that's a very real situation for that group of people, whereas like this was just a group of what I'm assuming was all white people, and that was like a very hypothetical, voluntary experience for them. It was just that was always kind of in the back of the mind. It didn't really feel right. The author does take the time to give some land acknowledgments at the end of the book, but it's like literally, this is a paragraph. So I think that it could have either been more worked into the story of like, you know, before we left and went to the city and this wilderness used to be something. I feel like that could have been like incorporated into the story, or I felt like our author could have done a better job of elaborating on the land acknowledgments and acknowledging like what happened to Indigenous cultures and how much it's reflected in the story, if that makes sense. Because really all she's acknowledging is the land and the tribes that this kind of group of people were based off of, or loosely based off of, which is kind of why I knocked down my rating of it a lot. I think it read like a 4-ish star book, but I pegged it down to like a 3. You just can't erase a group of people that you like kind of took the story from. It was a fascinating story. It was interesting, and at the heart of it, I just loved the group dynamic and the relationship dynamics that were involved in this book. And I thought they were just really fascinating, and that's what really kept me so engrossed in this book. I also am just glad I never would have picked this up if it wasn't for the Stacks Pod. Like, I just don't think it was on my radar. It wasn't on my want to read list. So it's definitely, I'm really glad that Tracy picked this, because I thought it was like a thinker. I don't know if I really put all my thoughts eloquently or that I really sorted all my thoughts in this video, but I've been really thinking about this book a lot, and just, it's one of those books I feel like that, yeah, it really allows you to think about the characters, like what constitutes a good story, what is allowed in a story, and I just felt like there was a lot of things. And like, I really highly recommend that if you read this, or if you decide to read this, then to also go and listen to the podcast episode where they talk about this book, because there's so many metaphors that I missed that are like for a lot of things, especially like a lot of biblical metaphors are in this book, and it was just like really like when they were talking about it made a lot of sense, but I did not catch while I was reading it. So again, I really think you guys should check out that podcast, and especially if you read this book, check out that particular episode. If you guys have read The New Wilderness, please let me know in the comments below. I want to know your guys' thoughts, and like, please tell me that you were Team Glenn and like thumbs down Carl for every single day, all day, because that's how I felt. And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, please subscribe. And before I go, make sure that you are checking out the Women's Prison Book Project. I talked about it in my February wrap up, but that for every video in March that I put out, I will be donating a book to the Women's Prison Book Project, and I will make sure to include all the information for that down below, and also let you know what book I'll be donating for this video. So check that all out, and I will see you guys next time.